Okay, how are you doing? So welcome to another event with Dublin Coding School. This time we're looking at web development. We're delighted to have you all here. Just before we start, just to say, if you have any questions at all, do type them into the bottom of the Facebook feed, and we'll get to all questions at the end. And if you're watching the recording of this, you can email in any questions to us at info@dublincoding.ie, and we'll get back to you with the answers. We'll talk a bit about Dublin Coding School first. So we're a tech education provider here based out of Dunleary. We're offering courses in full stack web development, which we're kind of talking a bit about tonight, but also data analytics, UX, UI design, automation testing, Python, Agile, among others. And we're offering courses for adults who want to change their careers. And as part of our service, we also have a career center where we'll help our graduates with their CVs, their online presence, and we'll also circulate their CVs to our partner companies who might have open roles or internships. So we have a lot going on. And also, if you're unemployed, we are also an approved trainer with local employment services and Intrio. So you can apply for a grant to do our courses as well. If you want more information about that, please do contact us. But enough about that. I'll now get on to introducing our speaker tonight, who is one of our lecturers in full stack web development, Podge Heavin. How are you doing, Podge? Good afternoon.
Afternoon. How are you doing?
So great. Look, delighted to have you here, Podge. Podge's going to be talking a bit about HTML, I believe CSS and JavaScript a bit later, and showing some live examples. But first of all, we just wanted to get an idea about what it's like to be a web developer, and maybe we can start off, Podge, just talking about a bit about your background and how you got into web development.
Yeah, of course. Well, I went to college here in Galway, and I did engineering. Electronic engineering, which is a little bit different than web development, but there was a part of it that was web development, which I found it very interesting. So I did an internship in Galway where I got some good experience with it. So I joined a company in Galway. I worked with many different areas, but I found my niche in web development because I just really enjoyed it, but also I really enjoyed how you can develop something and kind of see it working on the page live in a website, in a browser. You know, you can see the fruit of your work right there in front of you. So
yeah. And so that's what first attracted you to it. And so what does so for people who are watching now, we kind of think that some people who watch these are would not have done web development yet and might be just interested to learn a bit about it. So what actually does a web developer do? What's the scope of the role?
Yeah, it can vary, obviously, but the scope of the role really is to code up and write the website how either your designer or yourself, depending on who you're making the website for, sees fit. So, you know, creating buttons and interactive parts of the website, or any web component you're building inside the browser. So I guess it's making it, you know, what would be previously just images or static information more dynamic and usable and, you know, searchable and different things on the website, basically making something interactive so the user can use it.
Yeah, okay, great. And I know that our course is called Web Development Full Stack. Now, I know some people who've watched our videos in the past, our broadcasts, or even emailed us, are asking, what does full stack mean?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
And also, sorry, just to say, and also this thing about being the front end and the back end.
Yes, yeah. That's an interesting one. All right. I guess when you go onto a website, we'll just say facebook.com. The first thing you do is type facebook.com into your search bar, and it loads up Facebook. But what's actually happening there is it's making a request to a server, probably in the United States, or could be in Ireland or Europe somewhere, and requesting information for facebook.com. So that's what your back end is. It's bits you don't see. It's the bits sitting on a server in the United States and whatever. And then, of course, there's a database where it holds your data. So how do we know it's you? Or when you type in your username and password, how do we know you are who you are? So it goes to the database, checks your password against your information that's saved securely there. And then as a result of that, might display the web page in a certain way. So for example, you logged in correctly, it would open your home page. So the website, the front end part of it would start to render the home page, whereas you entered in your wrong password. Instead, the front end might get a request from what we call the back end or the server saying that that password is incorrect. So as a result, instead of showing the home page, we would show an error saying you've entered the wrong password. So the back end is kind of processing your data and both reading and writing your data, saving it. And then the front end is your representation of that. It's showing you the information based on what's in the database. So that's the whole idea of full stack. Typically of database, some sort of logic on the server, and then your front end, which is inside your browser or your application, maybe on your phone or whatever.
That's a great example. I think that's one of the best examples we've had, actually. And the way it's with the passwords and showing the representation. I never thought about it that way. That's really good. And of course, just to say on the course that we're having, the full stack web development course, we're looking at that, aren't we? So we have the back end, MySQL, PHP, managing the databases, and then we have the front end technologies, which you're going to look on a bit later. So what would be typically, so when you've got a, you've been working as a web developer, what would a day in the life, a working life be of a web developer?
Yeah, I think it's probably some bits are common to what any kind of developer. Typically, in most kind of companies these days, they run a module called Agile, which I know we do a course in as well. But usually your day starts off with what's called your stand-up, and this happens daily, and it's a 15-minute meeting where we talk about what I've been doing yesterday, what I'm going to do today, and if I have any problems, now is my time to say I have a problem with this, I need help, or we need to look at this differently. So your day starts with that. Then typically our work is already organized or planned ahead. So for example, at the moment, I'm working on a thing where I need to sort tasks in a list to make sure that the sort is maintained, so that it's maintained correctly in the database and on the screen. So I would start developing that how I think it should be, might be asking advice or giving advice if other people are stuck on other things. Then we'd be running tests to see, okay, I think I have this working, test it out, running both tests manually by playing around with it on the site, or actually coding tests themselves. We can write code to test code, of course. So it varies like that. And then we have other days where we might do planning, where we look at like what features we want to implement in our application. So for example, we wanted the users to be able to sort these tasks and maintain that task between sessions, or that order between sessions. So that's a feature. And I'm just doing one part of it, and another person might be doing a different part of it. But in my day, basically, you'll continue on what you're doing, or you'll you have your stand up, you write your code, you write your tests, then you might publish your code for what we do peer review. So your whole team would review your code, regardless of whether they're senior, junior, how long their experience is. Everyone reviews everyone's code, because one person might find an error that another person wouldn't see, and you're trying to catch as many bugs as possible because you don't want mistakes getting in, and next minute it doesn't work right.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of teamwork going on there as well, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah. Teamwork, definitely.
So what kind of attributes or skills do you think you'd need to be a great web developer?
Yeah, communication is an important one, obviously, because it's such a team orientated job. I think asking for help, being able to ask for help and give help when asked for it as well is important. Another thing, people think you need to know maths inside out or anything else to do with maths. Really, it's not. If you have a little bit of logic in your brain, that's all you really need. Maths doesn't really come into it. And plus with programming, because it's such a big industry now, there's so many examples out there and places to get help. And usually, like as I said, like communication and asking for help is important, because when you're put on a team, there's always usually there's somebody that knows better or more or have more experience than you. So you have to be able to obviously go and ask them for help. And you learn so much by that, because they'll be giving you examples and things like that. So that's important as well.
Great. Okay. I'm glad you mentioned the maths thing, because that's a question that comes up quite a lot, actually. People are asking that, and is it relevant to coding? But it isn't, is it? So it's so just a quick, before we get into your slides and a look at the actual technologies, what advice would you have for someone who might be watching this, who's a complete beginner thinking about getting into web development?
Well, first of all, go for it. There's plenty of jobs out there. There are an abundance of jobs and not so many developers. start small, I guess. Start with something simple, even like, play around with things at home. And if you can, there's plenty of examples online and tutorials you can start with. And of course, like we run these courses for absolute beginners. So like a course like this would be ideal to get your foot on the ladder of learning software development, so that's what I really just get going on it, like play around with it. Like you can't go wrong by just messing around with things, and there's plenty of resources out there as well.
And that's a great point about the jobs market, isn't it? That at the moment there are more job adverts for web developers than there are people. So it's really key to get people trained up.
Yeah.
So if you were,
Definitely.
I suppose, if you were looking for a career change or you're out of work, it might be an area to look into.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of jobs out there. Like, and I've been on both sides of it, and not so recently looking for a job, but on the side kind of trying to hire people, and like trying to get people even, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Because there's just so many jobs out there, so there's so many options, and the fact that you can, a lot of companies have adopted the remote working, which means that like typically, jobs that people would be only able to apply within saying, I'm in Galway now. You could, I'd only be looking for jobs in Galway if I was looking, but now you can, there's jobs in Dublin, but you can work remotely. So, the market is so wide now as well.
Yeah, it's all opening up. That's a good point as well. So look, were you going to have a look at, was it HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? So we're going to have a quick talk of that, and then maybe go through a coding example for everybody as well. So I'll just allow you to share screen, and what I might do is just turn off my camera for a moment and let you just go through those slides. And before I do, we're going to take questions at the end. So if you have any questions on the slides or the coding example or about any of the courses or web development, please type them into the chat and we'll get to all the questions at the end. So Podge, I'll hand it over to you now just to go through your slides and those coding examples.
Cool, thanks. All right. Yes. So I'm just going to talk about what kind of web pages. This is kind of your standard web pages that you would see in any website. Now, there is different technologies you can use, but HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are in every website. And you typically don't need to know any more than this to develop your own website. So you have 3 different layers to your to any kind of web page, and HTML being one, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which you don't really need to know. But basically that's your web page structure. Like you can add in titles, paragraphs, lists, and things like that. Then we have CSS, which stands for your cascading style sheets. Again, not really important, but this kind of styles the structure that you've set up in the HTML. So adds color or space and padding and formatting the objects on the page. And then the last thing, which is probably the more complicated one, but makes your website really rich, is JavaScript. So this is a scripting language, or the programming language that exists behind all the scenes. So this can dynamically update and change the content on your page. It can send and receive data back and forth from the server and things like that. So these 3 layers are the main layers of your web page. So I have some demos I'm going to go through. Some very small snippets that like should be easy enough for people who have never done coding before, hopefully. So here I'm just giving an example of what a HTML file would look like. So it's made up of kind of 2 parts: your head, which has kind of non-visible information and your setup for your page, and then your content. So in this content, I made an example here where we have a header, which is a H2 tag, header 2, that stands for. We have a paragraph, which again, the P tag. And then we have what's called an unordered list. So this is your unordered list, and this is your list item, list item, list item, list item. So this is just HTML. We have no styling on this, and we have no code in behind this. So when we view this, this is what it looks like inside our browser. So each browser has its own default styling. So this is Chrome's default styling. I don't think I have Firefox installed to show you Firefox, but it might be slightly different. They vary slightly. And then using your CSS, you can always overwrite those styles. So you can see here, and I'll just demo this here. And we'll add in just a new item just so you can see the changes. I'll refresh here. You can see line item 5 has been added. Another thing I might do is add in an input where a user might want to enter in information. So you can see I can enter in information. So using JavaScript, we might be able to extract that information from the page so we know what the user's entered. And we can pass it down to the server or save it or do whatever we need to do with it. So this is a very, very basic page. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a little bit of style to it. So again, I have my head here. So this is our setup. If you remember, this is where the setup code goes. So I'm importing a CSS file. So this is our style.css file. And what I've done here is I have added an ID to our H2, which is our header 2. I've added an ID to be able to identify this guy. On our list items, I've added a class. So a class, you can have only one element on the page can have the same ID, but multiple elements can have the same class. So what we use in CSS then is what's called a selector. And it's a certain format of writing a selector to be able to identify an object on the page. So in this case, if I put down a hash, it means ID. So in other words, I'm saying anything on the page has an ID of title. Let's put a background color of black on it. Anything with ID title, let's put a color of white, which is your font color, and a padding, which is just a little bit of space around. So I'll actually leave that out for the moment just to show this example, and I'll do the same here. And then for any class, so the dot means class. So any class with list item, we're going to put a border of 1 pixel. It's going to be a solid line, and it's going to be red. So let's have a look and see what that looks like. So there you can see my solid line are red. My background is black here. It's white colored. So let's change this to red for the crack here. And again, you can see that it's changed now. So this CSS is this selector, which means ID title, is selecting this guy because his ID equals title and applying that styling to it. And then my dot list item is selecting each of these items and applying the same style to each of them. So every single one gets the same style applied to it. So you can see that my items are quite bunched together. So this is where padding comes in. So it's just a bit of space to put in between them. So I go padding 5 pixels and I hit save and just give it a refresh. You can see they jumped out a little bit. So now we have a little bit of more space to it. Also, our list looks a bit silly that it's this long. So we might just limit the width on it. So by default, as I said before, some of these items in our HTML have default styling. So for an unordered list, the default styling is that its width is 100%, so the full width of the screen. But we're going to limit that by overriding it with our own width. So I'm going to say 150 pixels. And I'll refresh. And we can see that now our list is no longer as long as it was. Now I might, for fun, we'll change it. So you can see that this is an unordered list, so it's just bullet points. If I change this to an OL, which is a certain tag, which stands for ordered list, and I refresh, you can see now it has changed to 1, 2, 3, 4, because my list is ordered. So I have specifically said this is a specific order, and I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4 rather than bullet points. And I can change it back to UL. And you can see if I refresh it, we're back to our bullet points. So that's all good. That's all styling, but it's not very interactive. There's nothing I can do here to say, you know, on this page, I'm only reading information. So this is where we can go and add a little bit of JavaScript. And as I said before, this is the dynamic kind of where you can dynamically update content. So in this example here, again, in my setup, I've imported my JavaScript file using a specific script tag. And you can look up these HTML tags, like there's a whole specified tags that you can look them up online. Like, you know, there's a load of different things like dividers, breaking spaces, sections, articles, footers, headers, you know, but I'm just giving, you know, 3 examples here of your H2, your P, and your unordered list. And of course, I might not have mentioned earlier, your body is always part of your HTML. So you have HTML, your head, which is your setup, your body, which is your content, and then your content goes in there. So in this case, I've added a button. I've given the button an ID. No, I haven't. That's wrong. I give it an ID of. Give it an ID of add item button. So this is an event that button can give out. So it's on click, it's going to run the add item code. Now this, you're wondering where is the add item code? It's in this file. So I've created a function. So a function is basically a piece of code that's going to run. It's contained between these curly brackets. So when I click this button, by literally putting this line of code here, I'm telling it to run that code. And I'll explain what that does in a minute. So if I go back to my other example, so I'm on example 3 here. For example, if I remove this and I just refresh, you can see adding item does nothing. And if I go add item now, sorry, I need to refresh. I go add item, new item added, new item added. So it's dynamically updating the screen in front of me. So if I actually inspect this guy, so and you're on every browser, there's what's called debug tools, where you can see the kind of current state of the affairs and debug codes and whatever. But you can see there's my original list items, and here's the new ones that I've added. So the HTML looks different than what I had here because my JavaScript has dynamically updated the HTML. Sorry, now I'll close that guy again. So I'll just explain what the code is doing here. So I have my function, which is this container of code. I've created a new element. So a new element is basically a new tag. So this is an element, this is an element, this is an element. Everything that is a tag, basically, which is the angle brackets, is an element. So I'm telling on the document, I'm telling create a new one, I'll create a new LI, so a new list item. I'm saying set its inner text, so the text in the middle of it, to be new item added. And then I'm saying document get an element by ID. So if you look, I've added an ID to an unordered list, and I just call the ID list. So I'm telling the document to get me the list and append a child to it. And I want to append the new item. So you can see every time I do that, it's adding a new item on the bottom of the list. So that's how you dynamically update. And you can see here that actually, because if I again go to inspect this, you can see that these guys are missing the class. So the style isn't being applied to it anymore because it's missing the class, but it is being applied to these ones. So we can add the style. So I go new item. Sorry, now. New item dot class list. I'm gonna go to add, and I think it was list item. Refresh this guy. And now you can see that every new item now also has the same styling as the previous items. And if I inspect it one more time, you can see that they have the class list item added to them. Actually, make that a little bit wider there. So you can see as I hover over them, it'll actually highlight on them each one. So the new ones now have the class list item attached to it. So every time I click the button, because I'm binding to the on-click event, it's running my little bit of JavaScript. So that's my miniature demo of how basically the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all interact with each other to come up with some sort of design. So like if I go back just to the CSS, as I said, we can change these colors to red. So there's a lot of like keywords. So for example, if I change here to be, say, for example, banana, which isn't a valid color, it'll revert to the default. In this case, the default is white, or it would actually be transparent. So I now have a white on white background, which again makes no sense. Again, if I put in thing here, which is invalid value, again, it'll revert to the default, and in this case is black. So for colors, there's certain values you can put in, or you can put in what's called color codes. So again, all this kind of what you can and can't do, or what these values can and can't be, all documented online on different websites, which you can easily see. So you can say, if I have a title and I want to add a color, I can look up online, well, what are the available values I can put in here? And there's 101. If you're using what's this IDE is called Visual Studio Code, it'll actually give you a hint for some of them. So you can see some of the named ones. So we'll go sea green, which is a valid color. And now we have a background with sea green. So that's my basic demo. Other than that, I have a few more slides just to explain what JavaScript is and what it isn't. One thing that people might have heard of is Java and JavaScript. Java and JavaScript are two completely different programming languages. One of the guy that invented JavaScript regretted calling it JavaScript because it's nothing like Java. And to that effect, when JavaScript was accepted and it was standardized, it was actually renamed to ECMAScript, which stands for the European Computers Manufacturer Alliance or something like that, or Association Script. But everyone still calls it JavaScript. So there's a lot of different versions that were built over the time. You can see that 1997 was the first version. You can see that Internet Explorer 11, the latest version they support is the 2009 version, which is JavaScript 5 or ECMAScript 5, and then the modern browsers will keep going. So obviously you have your browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Safari, and Internet Explorer. If you use an Internet Explorer, get rid of it. It's too old at this stage. So basically that's that. And then the other thing is, modern uses of JavaScript. So JavaScript has evolved quite a lot in the last 10 years alone, in such a way that once upon a time was kind of a language just for your browser. And what I discussed earlier about what full stack development was, where you have your database, your back end, and then your front end. So front end being the browser, back end being kind of some logic or business logic that, you know, changes around your data before reading or writing it from the database. But that back end exists on a server and it doesn't have like a UI or a visual component to it. So JavaScript in the last 10 years or so has been able to, you're able now to use what's called Node.js for back-end development. So, sorry, there we go. I did it again. For back-end development, which means that your server can now run JavaScript to do all that logic. So it can be used outside a visual thing like the web page or Chrome or whatever. Similarly enough, Electron is another technology that was kind of recently invented kind of for the browser, but the browser to exist as a desktop application. So it meant that now not only does JavaScript live inside your browser, but now it can be a desktop application. So like if you open Spotify on your computer, it's an example of actually that most of that is run on Electron and it's written in JavaScript, which also makes it very easy that you can build your website and then convert it into a desktop application without writing extra code. Other stuff like it can exist on mobile phones and command line tools you don't need to worry about. Then the future of kind of JavaScript, I keep doing that, is TypeScript, which is a wrapper around JavaScript, which was built by Microsoft, but makes JavaScript development very easy, or easier to be exact, and less loose. So one thing about JavaScript is you didn't know if you had an object or something with a property on it, and the property was called, you know, as I said earlier, banana. We don't know if banana is a piece of text, if it's a number, if it's a true or false. Where TypeScript kind of allows you to be able to check, oh, I think that, you know, or know that it is a piece of text or it is a number or whatever. So I don't want to get into the details of that, but it just has better structure around JavaScript, which makes things a little bit easier. So that is the end of my presentation. Hopefully, Luke, hopefully you're still there.